Biden administration treated the press as poorly as any president has ever treated them, gave them less access, answered no questions, no transparency at any given time. Donald Trump's answered more questions in 3 weeks than Joe Biden answered in 4 years. Elon Musk answered more than
and also a lot of the answers.
Come on, Brian. This administration is giving the most access to the press they could possibly want.
To be clear, the main argument, Elena, that the Trump administration is making here is that that allowing transgender troops to serve hurts lethality and it hurts readiness. What do you say to that?
Well, there's no evidence of that. I think that, if that was the case, we've seen transgender people serving honorably for the last several years. And what has changed between now and then? They've just woken up to a new administration who has a different outlook on their ability to serve. So I think that, if you talk to people who are serving on active duty alongside transgender troops, they're not making these complaints. The leaders in the military are not making these complaints. These are political complaints about military service. So I think that all of the courts that have looked at this issue and looked at it, and said there's nothing in fact to back up what the government is claiming here. In fact, the judges challenged them to produce evidence, and they couldn't produce any evidence. So I think it's a really dark day for our country, where basically we're allowed to discriminate against a class of people.
Scott, if they can't produce evidence that this actually does, in fact, have an impact on readiness, how is this not then just discrimination?
Well, it's the opinion of the commander-in-chief, who, according to our Constitution, is the head of the military. Regardless of anyone's opinion or anybody's, whatever side you're on, whether you're for it or against it, at some juncture, the president is the commander-in-chief of the military, and he has and should have broad latitude to determine how the armed forces should be operated. And so I think that's what he's doing here. I think that's ultimately what the court said today, was that the president is the commander-in-chief, and we gotta respect that.
But to her point, if there's not a downside, and it's been going on for years now, and I'm just presenting your argument to them.
Yeah.
What is the argument other than Trump, Hegseth, just doesn't want trans people in the military?
Well, I think that the president will ultimately see. I think that's why the court is allowing the president to move forward with this until it works itself through the court system. Maybe the Supreme Court will be the final arbiter here to say, yeah or nay, you can do this. But ultimately, I think the court is showcasing deference to the executive, saying that, look, you're the president, you're over the military. You do, for the most part, get to sort of dictate the standards of our military. And I don't really see how you can push back against that. Again, we'll see what happens in the court.
I can.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I can. What if the president wakes up tomorrow and says, I don't want any black people in the military? Do we give deference to him on that? Well, no, wait a second. It's not ridiculous. It's not ridiculous because you're discriminating against a group of people in a very similar way. No,
I knew you were going to say that, but it's still
excuse me. Well, I'm glad you.
I'll leave this one alone today.
I'm curious. Why is it ridiculous? You just said the president should be the one who just decides.
Right.
So if he decides, he wakes up tomorrow and says, I think it's bad for morale, it's bad for cohesiveness, for there to be black people in the military, Latino people in the military, just in her hypothetical scenario, what's the difference between that and what we're seeing here?
Are you really going to go down this ridiculous road?
I'm sorry.
This is ridiculous. It is a ridiculous argument.
Well, okay.
The president,
what they've already
the president
said
and the Secretary of Defense, the president and Secretary of Defense have an argument here. They believe that readiness and unit cohesion and overall operations of the military are impacted by this. That is their opinion, and that is the opinion of the commander-in-chief, who the Constitution gives broad latitude to run the armed forces. So that's their opinion. You're allowed to have one. You're allowed to have one. You're also allowed to run for president and become commander-in-chief yourself. But until you do, he's the commander-in-chief.
I have to just say, I didn't hear an answer to the hypothetical, right? I just didn't hear it. The definition of discrimination, according to the American Psychological Association, discrimination is the unfair or prejudicial treatment of people or groups based on characteristics such as race, gender, age, or sexual orientation. What is the difference between, prohibiting certain groups, like transgender people, from serving versus, people based on their race or even their gender, frankly?
I personally think there's a difference, and I'm just going to leave it at that.
Well, I will say...
Do you believe that race and... Are you saying that the quality of race and the quality of transgender are the same?
I'm just asking the question because I think you're making there's a distinction, but you're not explaining why.
No, I'm asking, you guys brought up the hypothetical. Are you arguing that someone's race is the same as someone choosing to become transgender.
But your argument, you've made the argument twice that the commander-in-chief's opinion is all that matters. You've said that twice now.
Well, under the Constitution, yes.
So if he wakes up tomorrow and says it's not okay to be gay or lesbian and serve, because that's his opinion, there's nothing to back that up. They meet the physical standards, they meet the intellectual standards, they have voluntarily decided to serve their country, to give their life for this country. So many of us don't have to. That it's the opinion without any basis in fact that's what matters more than the Constitution of equal rights and equal protection.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say the other thing, or there's a few things that bother me about this, and mostly it was the language of the policy, right? When you're reading at some of these words, transgender people as inherently untruthful, undisciplined, dishonorable. That's like a very weighty thing to say about people who are courageously deciding to protect this country. The other problem, Scott, is that it's never enough. It's bathrooms today. It's sports today. It's sports tomorrow. It's the military today.
No, it's also sports today, by the way.
Yeah, it is sports today.
And 80% of Americans agree, by the way.
Oh, that's fine. And 80%, guess what? The majority sometimes is wrong. That also happens, right? Because the majority used to believe that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was somebody who was a threat, that somebody who was not a good American. The majority of people used to be against civil rights. Were they right? No, they weren't. And so the whole point is when you target one group, and inevitably that line moves to everybody else. And I'm not saying he's coming for black people tomorrow, but considering that this is a military or this is a leadership that is already using DEI as code word for black people already when it comes to the military, suddenly when you don't protect the most vulnerable, you wind up making it worse for everybody else that's in the marginalized community. You don't think trans people are vulnerable in this country?
So is it your position that the commander-in-chief should recruit people who you're describing as vulnerable into the lethal fighting force?
He should recruit people who want to serve and protect this country. And it's really kind of ironic considering he dodged the draft that he suddenly has an opinion about
He has an opinion because he won the election.
The good news is, and Elena, you pointed this out, this is going through the court system. The other side has the opportunity to present evidence.
Except for tomorrow, there should be thousands of people who wake up and get processed out. The harm will be done.
And I certainly understand that. But again, there's still an opportunity for it to continue through the proper process.
Right, but they wake up tomorrow without a job, being removed from their commands. Operational readiness will be impacted. And so there's commands that are going to be left without leaders. There's going to be real-life implications for theaters around the world where our military is protecting this country. And for what end?
Elaine, I guess my point is, if a strong enough evidence is presented throughout the court process, all the way up to SCOTUS, and it's ultimately believed, okay, hey, the other side has enough evidence where we can't rule in favor of the executive, then the executive, I believe, would respect that decision. But we have to allow this thing to move forward and see what was
your experience in the military like? Did you serve after you had transitioned, or?
No, I served before my transition.
So you weren't in during your at all?
No. I came to know that I was transgender while I was serving with a top secret and above clearance. And I knew that I couldn't pass my polygraph test. And so I had to make a tough decision. Do I stay true to my character, my values, my integrity, or do I choose to leave this role and live a private life? And so I think that the challenge is that the injunction was to allow people to continue to serve while the courts played out. Right? So there would be no harm done to these folks, giving the courts an opportunity to work through these issues so people wouldn't lose their jobs. Now they're going to wake up tomorrow without jobs. They can't just come back in for serving 22 years, waiting for this court case to work its way through for 6, 9 months, 2 years.
So you hadn't, so was there a prohibition on you transitioning while you were in the military?
Back in that time, there was a ban against serving if you were the don't ask, don't tell policy.
This was in the mid-90s.
This was in the mid-90s. Yeah.
So, but can I ask you a question? Because I think this is relevant. You know, Elena was serving, left because of this policy. How many people is it okay to lose who are competent, who are doing their jobs because for reasons like that? I mean, at the time, she could have been a gay or lesbian, and it probably would have been the same result as well. I mean, I think that's why ultimately they ended Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
I mean, I think
discrimination.
I think ultimately the commander-in-chief and the Secretary of Defense have to decide comprehensively about troop levels, troop readiness, and unit cohesion, and overall recruitment. They're actually quite happy with recruitment right now.
But that has never there's never been a military standard that transgender people have not met. So the military standards have not been lowered for people who are transgender. And I think that's the issue here. And the courts that have looked at this issue in depth have said this is pure animus, that there is no evidence of this. So if you actually take the rhetoric out of it and look at the issue at its heart, all the courts say the same thing. So I think that's the travesty here.
I believe the president has the constitutional right to do this, and I also think you have the constitutional right to make your case on it, and everybody's going to be in court about it, and I think you should continue to make your case.
But you also talked about unit cohesion, and that's exactly the same kind of argument that they made against integrating the military when Harry Truman did it. I'm sorry, it's the same argument. Okay. It's the same.
I mean, is she wrong about that though?
Okay.
I mean, she is right about that.
Did not want to serve
I'm aware.
White people didn't want to serve with black people because of unit cohesion. So now you're saying gay people shouldn't serve with straight people.
We only have a couple seconds. Chair Michael, I see that you're frustrated that she made that argument, but is she wrong that unit cohesion was used as an excuse to keep the military segregated for a long time?
I think we should
and also don't ask, don't tell when it comes to discriminating against gay and lesbian people.
We should focus on the issue at hand. That's what I think.
Same argument.
But no, we should focus on the issue at hand. I don't know why we keep going to bringing up race. Let's just focus on the issue at hand.
Look, it's race, sexual orientation. We've seen this twice, right? In two major junctures for the military. I'm just wondering if she is drawing parallels here between the arguments that are being made to maintain this policy.
I reject those parallels. That's my answer. I reject the parallels. I think they're ludicrous parallels.
Do you feel like you had a choice in your life as to what you were going to do? Or no, of course not.
No.
The same way that I didn't have a choice to be born who I was, the same way you didn't have a choice to be born who you were. So why do we get exclusions and she doesn't?
I didn't say that Elena should be excluded.
Okay, why, under this president's policy,
my opinion here is let it work itself through the court system.
And I have no problem with that, but just don't fire people while it's working through the courts. That's what these injunctions were doing, was letting it work through the courts. And the Supreme Court, I think, really just delegitimized itself even further today. And I think that's a challenge for all of this country when we don't have the checks and balances of the courts, checking the executive power, and Congress checking the executive power, and all of those things. Because at the end of the day, right now in the military, you can be a white supremacist, a known white supremacist, and serve in this military, but you cannot be transgender and serve in this military. That's a fact.
I think illegal immigration, which has been around for a long time as an invasion, which is fine for you if you want to do that. But why is that unusual that there's a process to go through to deport people? I mean, that's actually just how the system works.
Do you know how long it takes for this process, this paperwork to get people out? The guy that we've all been weeping and gnashing teeth over, the guy we sent to El Salvador, was in the country 14 years illegally.
But what about what
We've got millions of people who have gamed this system, and now we're going to give it to them.
Either you believe in the Constitution or you don't.
I believe in the sovereignty of the United States, or you don't.
But do you believe in the Constitution?
I believe in the sovereignty of the United States, and I believe we've been
And you don't believe that Donald Trump should abide by the Constitution?
Just a serious question.
Of course I do. And of course I believe.
Do you believe that he does?
And I believe that he will follow, just as he said, what the Supreme Court says. But the policy debate is worth having.
From the very beginning,
millions upon millions of people are here, and they will not leave, and he has to get them out.
Always believed in executive
Hold on a second.
Always. From the very beginning. From 2016, he has believed in executive overreach. We've all seen that. He said it. It was clear. Are you saying now that you don't believe that he believes in executive overreach?
I believe that he believes his mandate from the American people is to solve illegal immigration. And I would ask you the same question in reverse. Did Joe Biden, when he said he would faithfully uphold and execute the laws of this land, not mean it when he decided to let millions upon millions of people into the country? Because he did not execute the laws.
I thought that you were going to squirm out of that question.
I'm not squirming.
Yes, you did. And that's why I prepared for it, because I want to read you something. At the core of Trump's candidacy is a call for greater executive authority with willful disregard for the constitutional limits placed on our chief executive. Trump especially promises to force individual companies to do things he wants them to do, or else he promises punishment to those who displease him, which appeals to the miserable man at the airport bar. Do you recognize that?
Yeah, I wrote it.
Exactly.
And here's the deal.
He hasn't changed, so what has changed about you?
And here's the difference between then and now. This country has been invaded. The president was elected to end the invasion. So you changed your opinion
on the Constitution?
My opinion is the president needs to pull every lever he can to solve illegal immigration.
So you've answered that question by saying that you don't mind him being unconstitutional.
that every immigrant here is the same. You can't believe that because
Yes.
they're not. They're not.
I do.
There's some good, there's some bad. There's some criminal,
I
they're
believe,
not.
I believe
And how
everybody
do you-
who's here illegally
hear
is
this
here
out.
illegally.
How do
Not
you
all are
differentiate?
violent, but all are here illegally.
But how do you differentiate if nobody gets a hearing, if you don't have due process? How do you distinguish one from the other?
Well,
so what you're saying is every person that's here in this country is a criminal, is a gang member, should be thrown in jail.
Every person who's
That's
here
what's
illegally,
happening.
every person who is here illegally is in fact a criminal. Some of them do come here and commit violent crimes
Some of
and
them, but
still
how do you
aren't
differentiate
deported.
if you don't have a
Well,
process?
some have records and some don't.
But they
I'm
still
here to
have
break the news.
constitutional rights.
They're all going
hold on a
away.
second.
Still have constitutional
I want to make
rights.
sure that we're not straying from the point of this conversation, which is a question about due process rights. And so I'll just ask really quickly, do you believe that undocumented immigrants have to have due process rights, that that's constitutionally what they are entitled to?
I'm unsure of what that means in the context of some of the cases that we've been dealing with in the news lately, because I've been looking at these people who have been here for 14 years, have been through numerous immigration courts.
All right, well,
I have a question about what does that mean?
All right.
Yes,
Let
I
me-
agree,
let me-
but what does it mean?
Let me bring the Supreme Court into this since you brought them up. This is what two different Supreme Court justices have said about this issue in the past.
Do undocumented immigrants have the 5 freedoms?
Oh, I think so. I think anybody who's present in the United States has protections under the United States Constitution.
The 14th Amendment, it doesn't speak of citizens, as some constitutions grant rights to citizens, but our Constitution says person. And the person is every person who is here, documented or undocumented.
Batya, I wonder why it's so difficult to understand a pretty simple concept. If Trump wants to deport illegal immigrants, he can do that, but he ought to do it legally. Do you think that that is a fair thing to say at this moment?
I do. I do think the media is pulling another, dictator for a day hoax right now, because it's clear when Trump said, "I don't know," what he meant was what he finished his sentence saying, which is, "I don't know where the Supreme Court is going to come down on whether deporting these illegal migrants is constitutional or not." It's very obvious, yet every single headline...
You just called it a hoax, so let's just play. Can we play it again in the control room, what Trump said in response to Kristen Walker?
Your Secretary of State says everyone who's here, citizens and non-citizens, deserve due process. Do you agree, Mr. President?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know.
Well, the Fifth Amendment says
I don't know. It might say that, but if you're talking about that, then we'd have to have 1 million or 2 million or 3 million trials.
So can I respond to that?
Yeah.
So what does it mean for an illegal immigrant to have due process? We would all agree that they do not have the same level of due process that we do. For example, we are entitled to a jury trial, and they are entitled to a hearing before an immigration judge. Do you know who the immigration judges work for? They work for the executive branch. They work for, which means that they work for Donald Trump, which
you're
means
actually
that
making
he is in
a great,
charge
you're making a great
of the due process that they get.
But Donald Trump doesn't even want to give him even that due process.
Say that.
I mean, I think
he
that's
said
part of the problem.
He is not sure the level to which they are entitled.
She didn't ask about what
process,
level of due process.
That's a very basic, simple
No, I mean, the reason I'm jumping in here is because she did not ask him should they have a jury trial? Should they not have a jury trial? She just said whatever process they are entitled to. If they're immigrants and they're in an immigration proceeding, then yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a different type of proceeding. It's actually more of an administrative proceeding.
It's a much lower standard as well. Even still, they are trying to circumvent that minimal amount of due process.
Then why
and the question is,
let me give
why?
You an example. I'll give you an example. In the example of Kilmar Obrego Garcia, I believe he already got his due process.
Yes.
He had a deportation order. So for Trump to be asked, does that man deserve more due process? I think the answer is absolutely not. I don't want another dime of my taxpayer dollars to go to. He was not supposed to be sent to El Salvador. He had a deportation.
Let's put Kilmar Abrego Garcia to the side for just
I'm just using him as an example
I know that you are,
of someone who
but I
Trump
also
could
think
very legitimately say does not need any more due process.
Well, it's not Trump's decision to decide that. I think that's the end of the story, is that
It's not Trump who decides when the due process ends. It's a process for a reason.
Or to unilaterally decide this person is good, this person is bad, because I saw a picture of fake tattoos or whatever it is.
The president of El Salvador also tweeted this that I find fascinating. He says, Abrego Garcia miraculously risen from the death camps and torture, now sipping margaritas with Senator Van Hollen in a tropical paradise of El Salvador. I mean,
that was the first thing I noticed. I was like, are they at a continental breakfast? Like, what is happening? I'm not even trying to be funny. I know. The very first thing I noticed was like, that was not what I expected.
But let's be real about what's happening here. I mean, this is propaganda, because the other propaganda of the whole situation is that this is a hellhole. They were literally telling us the other day that it was a hellhole. You know who called it a gulag? The Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance. So, I don't know. Whose word do you take?
I see these pictures tonight, and I think, boy, the party of women is really covering itself in glory tonight. I mean, I don't understand why the American left falls in love with the worst people. You've got a gang-banging, human trafficking, wife-beating, illegal alien, and a United States senator in a ludicrous display of energy is in El Salvador having Mai Tais and Yahtzee. I do not get it. I do not understand why the left takes on the heroes.
The part of this,
I don't get it.
I think look,
I'm not allegedly in there somewhere. I'm just wondering.
He is a Democrat United States senator.
I don't think this is an issue of we know everything we need to know about this individual, right? But I do think that the idea that the administration continues to call him a terrorist and a gangbanger, knowing full well that those things are very much in dispute, is part of the story. And separately from that, as we just were talking about, the circuit court judge says it doesn't matter. He was sent to another country to be put in a prison that, let me just play for you, because I think it's a good encapsulation of what this prison is. This is what Ezra Klein said. You can see the pictures there, but let me just play what Ezra Klein has said about why this prison and sending people there is so significant for democracy and the rule of law.
The emergency is here. The crisis is now. Maybe not to you, not yet, but to others, to real people whose names we know, whose stories we know. The President of the United States is disappearing people to an El Salvadoran prison for terrorists. It is a prison that does not intend to release its inhabitants back out into the world. It is a prison where the only way out, in the words of El Salvador's Justice Minister, is in a coffin.
The El Salvadorans said that the only way out of this prison is in a coffin. I mean, when you do that, you should know pretty surely that the person you're sending there deserves to be imprisoned for life until death. I don't know.
Half of the people that they've sent there have no arrest record. So to be comfortable with the fact that those people, that is potentially the rest of their lives, you can't be cool with that. Like, that's not how you're supposed to adjudicate punishment in this country. If he is all of the things that you say he is, then let it all play out properly in the American court system. And then if you want to send them there. But I think half of the people that they're deporting, you're better off literally putting them on a raft and pushing them out into the ocean than sending them to that place.
And I didn't realize the law was only for perfect people. I didn't realize that's how we did things here. I'm not talking about people who commit actual crimes that we can prove, but if we're always putting this up against some purity test to say that, like, hey, because we think you might have done this, and again, I realize you're levying serious charges, but like, the law is not supposed to be about a purity test. It's supposed to be about what can you actually prove that someone has done.
I actually am not even all that worried about all the things that we have found out in the wake of the investigations into this guy. What I am worried about is that, and I'm going to grant you, he has a withholding order and he should not have gone to El Salvador.
And they admitted it was a mistake.
But even if you grant that, he has an adjudicated deportation order, and you have Democrat public officials falling all over themselves trying to get him back here without thinking through the next step, which is he's literally going to be deported somewhere else.
But not to
But my suspicion is when they bring him back, they're going to try to keep him here. That's the next part of the game.
We have degrees of things, right? There's a different punishment for a speeding ticket versus a different punishment for something else. So you're saying that what he has done, which is, okay,
come to the country illegally.
Okay, so he deserves to be in an El Salvadorian prison.
He deserves to be deported.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. No one is debating that.
Radical agreement, Scott Jennings. But we do know that judges do get to say whether the executive is complying with the law or not. That's been the case for decades, hundreds of years.
Well, I think there's a difference between saying whether you're complying with the law and then you have these individual district court judges setting effectively broad federal policy that is specifically reserved for the President of the United States. I think we do have a constitutional crisis, and it's being caused by these judges. They're not here to tell us. They're not here to tell us how to spend the money. They're not here to set broad federal policy. That is the president's job as elected by the people. These judges are supposed to be settling discrete, specific matters, not policy setting. I think Vance is right. I think Trump has a point. And these judges want nothing more to continue the lawfare against
I don't
Trump.
think anybody's going to be surprised to hear that you think Trump is right.
They're doing this on purpose.
However, just on a real important technical point here, one of the main disputes is whether the executive branch can just decide not to spend money that another co-equal branch has said ought to be spent. So it's not just about forcing the federal government to spend money. It's saying Congress said you need to spend this money this way, and the executive branch saying, no, I don't feel like it, and the courts say you have to comply
my answer to that simply is, it is the executive branch's job to figure out how to spend money once it is appropriated by Congress. And sometimes they spend money that's not been appropriated. But the correct political control is between the executive and the Congress, not some random
I want to return to that because
think
that is also a major legal question.
Do you really think that J.D. Vance's tweet is only about these district judges?
I think
this is about this is a slippery slope because they're going to move on to what the next ruling is. They're setting the stage so that they can say that the executive branch has control now over the judicial branch. They're setting the stage. And for people who think that President Trump has not planned all of this, he pushes the envelope constantly. There was January 6th. He has a myriad of people out there that would support the executive branch being able to rule over the judicial branch because there have been no repercussions. And when there are not consequences and when there are not repercussions, you get away with it.
I get it. You want individual federal judges who hate Donald Trump.
No, I don't.
To tie him up for 4 years.
No, I don't.
If you want a big policy questions decided, let the Supreme Court do it. But in the interim, the executive has to be allowed to govern.
How do we get to the Supreme Court? Can
Just
somebody tell me?
And that's fine. But you can't tie them up
we get
until
to
it
the
gets
Supreme
there.
Court.
You can't tie them up
we
until
get to
it
the
gets
Supreme
there.
Court by the judges ruling, things going to appeal, and then it goes
And in the meantime, what happens? Trump can't act?
In the meantime, you're supposed to comply with the court's rulings. Am I wrong about that?
Well, you're supposed to comply, but Scott's absolutely right in that the court cannot say you have to spend these dollars today. So as a governor, I dealt with this. We got things challenged in state court and federal court. It's all judge-shopped, by the way. Judges don't randomly get these cases. There's a reason that these cases are filed in Boston, the Boston court, or a certain district, Rhode Island, because they know they're going to get a judge that is politically
great
favorable.
bipartisan practice as well.
Yeah. Both sides do it. I mean, I think
how many times that district court and judge one guy in Texas shut down Joe Biden?
But you raised the right point. Should the president, the singular president, should he have to share the presidency with 300 district court judges? No, absolutely not.
But the point, though, you made a really good point that there have been judges that shut down some of President Biden's executive actions, and they understand, the Biden administration understood the checks and balances.
The Supreme Court tried to stop me, but they never will.
But not in the way that Donald Trump is.
Who said
not
that?
In the way that
Joe Biden.
Yeah,
Joe
but
Biden.
Donald Trump Scott, he actually didn't ignore it.
He did. Right. They continued to plow forward with student aid.
No, he didn't.
How much did they spend?
No. Let me set the record.
He actually got dinged on the student
loan forgiveness policy.
What did he say out loud?
I thought it was a ridiculous policy. I thought it was unconstitutional. I predicted it would get struck down. It did get struck down, and I applauded. He did not ignore it, though. He went and tried under a different law.
So he ignored it.
You're allowed. No,
that's not ignoring it.
So he was not ignoring it. He was trying to do it. But let me just understand where you stand. If a district court judge rules in a way that the president dislikes, should the president listen or should the president defy?
If a district court judge tries to usurp the authority of the chief executive of this country, he should absolutely defy it.